Hello. So I have my tea and I've been reading Sartre's Being and Nothingness, but I thought I would take a break. It is evening, so if you're watching, the lighting isn't like that great. But I wanted to talk about the Hymn of the Pearl, the Gnostic salvation text, or the text of like enlightenment. It shares, potentially a worldview that could reveal a secret or a purpose of life, our human predicament, what we need to do, which has themes of remembering who our sort of true self is, what our mission is, to not fall asleep and be distracted by the world. I think also to not be distracted by, well, I guess being distracted by the world would mean being distracted by and paying attention to the more material aspects and elements of life. Maybe our jobs, careers, the material goods that we have and consume, our relationships, our reputation, our fame, all of those things that have to do with production and leveling up in a way that just has meaning for this particular life on earth as a human being, to not be distracted by that. But, then the question would be, well, what's the alternative? So the sections, I think, are very helpful to understanding, being able to understand this work. And it's not very long. It's just about maybe like 8 pages. The first section is dressing for the journey. So it starts basically, I think, symbolically before we are born, when we are our higher self. And the idea of the higher self is that we have the memories and the wisdom of all of our past lives. And we are consistently at a high vibration, that vibration being of love. And then though if we're not finished reincarnating and learning lessons, then we take on material bodies and reincarnate and live our next life. A lot of people feel that we choose a lot of the elements of our life, which I think can be somewhat problematic. I think it's fine if that kind of story, which can be a bit fatalistic or deterministic, if that kind of story inspires you. What is that noise? I don't know. Hopefully it stops. My window's open. Sounds like the doors of the bin opening or something. But if that helps you, motivate you, and it helps you make peace with some of the trauma that has gone through your life, and you can see the positive gift from it, the resilience. But I think it sort of gets problematic when we want to say that that's a universal truth. And so, because I don't know if everyone looking at their traumatic the traumatic aspects of their lives, such as poverty or, anything that someone would, not want for their life. And I guess everyone's different, but if we were laying that on them and saying, well, you chose this, what are you learning from it? I'm not sure if that can be healthy. So I think But for the Gnostics in this particular piece, it's kind of like the main character is a child, and it's not, the child isn't the higher self that actually chooses. There's like a mother and father aspect, which can be said metaphorically to be a part of the child. Maybe that's the higher self. There are various levels. So yeah, but that's just what I wanted to say. Like, maybe it could be problematic as a universal kind of tool, but if it helps you, and then go for it. And so this child is on a journey and sort of like has a time of sleepiness and forgets the mission. But the mission is to obtain the pearl and then return. So what does the pearl symbolize? Maybe it symbolizes the spiritual awakening, the moment where, like, something that you acquire and gain. So the journey is to find the pearl, and finding the pearl symbolizes some kind of transition or evolution or something like that. But it's strange because the pearl is a very material thing. And then, it has a happy ending, but there's like a serpent. And I guess the other interesting thing is that there is the idea that when we are reincarnated and experiencing our life in a particular lifetime, that we have people on our side, our soul family, I guess some people say, are maybe our guides and kind of rooting for us and helping us along and protecting us in some instances, maybe from ourselves, trying to guide us. So there's that, because the child like gets messages and things like that. So dressing for the journey, the dragon and the deep sleep, remember the pearl, the bird of speech, the letter's voice, the garment of gnosis, the toga and the pearl, and that's the end. So the toga and the pearl are kind of like the return. Okay, so let's start. When I was a little child living in my father's palace in his kingdom, happy in the glories and riches of my family that nurtured me, my parents gave me supplies and sent me out on a mission. So I feel like this is signaling kind of the happiness and the bliss that you experience when, in the interim time between incarnations. And a lot of people that have near-death experiences, for instance, like, don't want to come back because it's so great being spirit and not suffering, and being of a higher vibration and just feeling love constantly and returning. Like, a lot of people don't feel like, some people do, but a lot of people don't feel like their families, like their earthly families, are supportive and loving and healthy relationships. And so it can be very redemptive, I think, for some people, those people, to have the idea that you have a family that is kind of ideal and that would feel like home, that are, that is waiting for you. But the mission is that we have to go back on boot camp Earth and learn more stuff. And so it says, and so I'm skipping some of it. They took off my bright robe of glory, which they made for me out of love. So this is whatever the body is in the interim. when you are connected with source. And took away my purple toga, which was woven to fit my stature. So something that's just perfect for you. Everything just fits and is appropriate. They made a covenant with me and wrote it in my heart so I would not forget. And this is very Platonic as well, right? Because Plato, Socrates said that every time you're learning something, it's not actually acquiring new knowledge, you're just remembering. And I think we've all had that experience where we read something and it just feels so, we understand it so deeply and so intimately, it feels as if like we already knew it and just had, like some people will say, wow, that was articulated in a way that I never could, but I already had the idea or the feeling inside of me. So when you go down to Egypt and bring back the one pearl that lies in the middle of the sea and is guarded by the snorting serpent, you will again put on your robe of glory. So it's fulfilling your destiny or manifesting the destiny that is in line with your soul and higher self, I guess. And also, the pearl is in the middle of the sea. It's guarded by serpents. So it's not going to be easy. All right. So the second section, the dragon in the deep sleep. So the child has two royal guides, and it says, I left the east and traveled down to Egypt with my two royal guides, since the way was dangerous and harsh, and I was very young to walk alone. But at some point, it says, when I went down into Egypt, my companions left me and I went straight to the serpent. So I think this is interesting. So for, people say that, well, first of all, various religious spiritual texts, like let's say the Greek scriptures, the Christian Greek scriptures, say that to enter the kingdom of heaven, you need to be like a child. And studies that kind of combine like spirituality with science, scientific studies say that when we are, this is where I'm getting that information. I guess I didn't complete that thought. Scientific studies say that during our first 7 years of life, our brain is mainly, or we are mainly in the, I don't know how to say this correctly, is mainly in the state of theta waves, which are the waves that we kind of produce in our brains when we are meditating or when we're going to sleep. It's kind of a hazy, very receptive state. And this is why, we observe that when we are children, we are very impressionable, which can be a great thing because we are learning. And whatever we learn is sort of embedded in us in deep memory, although not many of us can remember back to, a very young age. But it also can be dangerous because, we can be like emotionally groomed in different ways if we have adults around us with their own agendas that don't necessarily care or know how to care for children, right? But, so what did the Gnostics believe in this particular, that they were trying to say in this particular reading about the guides? It could just be that when our soul is, impregnated into or goes into the fetus, when we're gestating, like that process is accompanied by wise higher beings that are helping us. Or it could mean like then when we are children, but I don't think all of us would agree that we were protected as children from certain things. So, so this person is going straight to the serpent and settled close by him in an inn, waiting for him to sleep so I could take my pearl from him. So that's really interesting because that's not the middle of the sea, right? So maybe sea is metaphorical because this person is in an inn. But since I was alone, I was a stranger to others in the inn, yet I saw one of my own people there. I love this part because I think it kind of indicates that we're not here completely alone, that we have potentially, or we do have, our tribe, like our soul tribe. We do have people that incarnated with us, at least at the same time or within the same, like where we could meet each other when we were alive. And I think many people believe that the more that you, or the higher vibration you were at, makes you more primed to meet those beings. But I don't really know. But this is kind of symbolic of, like the recognition that we have when we meet someone, and it feels as if, again, it's not the first time that we're meeting them, that we're remembering our connection. So at first, it seems like the child is kind of aware that they're different. And so they want to disguise themselves to not be found out. So it says, then I put on a robe like theirs, lest they suspect me as an outsider who had come to steal the pearl. And again, this whole like stealing the pearl, like there's one pearl, this one child is taking it and stealing it. Maybe it's just it is a metaphor for the disclosure of secret knowledge. But then it says that I fell. So it says, I fell into a deep sleep. I forgot I was a son of kings and served their king. I forgot the pearl. Through the heaviness of their food, I fell into a deep sleep. And then it goes on to remember the pearl. It says, when all these things happened, my parents knew and grieved for me. And it says, the kings and princes of Parthia and all the nobles of the East wove a plan on my behalf, so I would not be left in Egypt. So it's like the guides coming to maybe direct you and help you out. Like, what prompts our spiritual awakening? When do we start being able to see that certain experiences, or all experiences, probably certain experiences, catapult our soul to understand and know more? Move my tea out of the way. It's getting dark. It's 7:49. So it says, they wrote me a letter and every noble signed it with his name. It says, arise, awake and arise from your sleep and hear the words of our letter. This is what they said. Remember that you are a son of kings and see the slavery of your life. So we're all on a mission. We have a goal. We have a purpose. And then the next section, the bird of speech. And serving as a messenger, the letter was a letter sealed by the king. And it rose up in the form of an eagle. It flew and alighted beside me and became speech. At its voice and the sound of its rustling, I awoke and rose from my sleep. So I think it's interesting that the messenger comes in the form of an animal. I guess, you know, I've heard various people say that, you know, when you see certain numbers, or they feel especially connected to a particular kind of animal, like a particular kind of bird, or something like that. And so what can be seen as a sign, and what kind of message can you get from that, or meaning can you get from that? So I awoke and rose from my sleep. It says, the words written on my heart were in the letter for me to read. So that sounds like you could read something in a book and it would remind you of what is inside. So I remember that I was the son of kings, and my free soul longed for its own kind. So, so I seized the pearl and turned to carry it to my father. Those filthy and impure garments I stripped off, leaving them in fields, and went straight on my way. So it's interesting that there's a return home. And, you know, I just wonder what that might say about what happens when you go through sort of a spiritual awakening and you realize certain truths that make sense, that make your life make sense. Part of, I think, you know, the journey that comes after that is just, I guess, spending more time in your spiritual pursuits and sort of being in service through your meditations, through your prayers, through acts of service, or your just more enlightened ways of approaching people and being in relationships, or whatever. If there's a spiritual dimension to your work, I can definitely see how that would be in many professions, or all professions, not the what, but the how. So I can see that kind of being sort of your return journey. Once you have this spiritual awakening, you are starting the return. And I feel that you're burning karma, and you can feel yourself getting less and less attached to this life, this material life, even as you have to continue doing certain things, and being more like ready for like the final transition. But let's see what the Gnostics say. The letter's voice. On my way, the letter that awakened me was lying like a woman on the road. And this, if you watched my last video or listened to the last podcast, you heard me pause, perhaps after I read that. And it's because I was reading the note. The note says, this understanding is based on the Greek version. In the Syriac version, the letter personified simply speaks forth with its own voice. Because I don't know, it sounds weird, right? Was lying like a woman on the road. And as she had awakened me with her voice, so she guided me with her light, as if she were an oracle. So it says that she was shown before me in her own form. Her voice soothed my fear, and its love urged me on. So there's kind of this idea here that it's good to have inspiration, and it's good to like renew your motivation after you have sort of your initial spiritual awakening and you feel like you're really solidly on the path. It takes inspiration, I think, to keep going, and to not just to keep going and continue on earth, but continue on the spiritual path to really learn as much as you can. You know, now I think your learning can be accelerated because you kind of know what you're doing, and or at least you know where you're going, where you're headed. And so yeah, so not to go too fast, because there is in the Gnostic literature and also in the Kabbalah, there's this idea that, well, first of all, you can't ever have complete, well, this is more in the Kabbalah, I think. You can't ever, or is it? It's in some Gnostic texts. You can't have complete knowledge, that your knowledge is at its highest sort of place, is that you know what you can't know. But maybe you do know it in a different way than like knowing it intellectually. But also this idea that if you shoot too fast up to heaven or source or whatever it is, you're going to be shot back down, because you have to go through the process. There's a lot of karma to burn. There's a lot of like, which can be shown, I think, through like maybe crying when you're meditating and like releasing that grief. Like there's just, you have to make the most of the journey on the other side, like after the spiritual awakening. And so the garment of gnosis is next. As I gazed on it, suddenly the garment like a mirror reflected me, and I saw myself apart as two entities in one form. So this, I think, is the return, putting back on the garment that you had left, had to leave so you could be incarnated. And then it talks about like how beautiful it is with all the jewels and everything. I saw it quiver all over and moving with gnosis and a pulsing knowledge. So you're putting on a garment of knowledge. Everything that you have experienced, like I said, from past lives, etc., that wouldn't necessarily help you to know in your journey of learning on Earth, but you get to put it back on when you finish the lifetime. I saw myself growing in stature, in harmony. Well, let's hold on, sorry. Okay, yeah, this is the garment, and the garment prepares to speak. It descends and says, I am the one who acted for him. For him, I was brought up in my father's house. I saw myself growing in stature, in harmony with his layers. What did I want to say about that? Or how can I explain that? I don't know. It's not coming to me right now. I am the one who acted for him. For him, I was brought up in my father's house. I saw myself growing in his stature, in harmony with his layers. I don't know. I think there's a lot to that right there. I'm gonna have to continue to think about it. The next and last is the toga and the pearl. It says, with regal movements, the robe was spreading toward me, urging me to take it. And love urged me to receive it, like, the passing over. And I stretched forth and received it and put on the beauty of its hues. Says there, and I clothed myself and ascended to the gate of salutation and adoration. It's interesting that there's a gate that's very like, I feel like from my background, from evangelistic Pentecostal Christianity, heaven was always described having a gate. I bowed my head and adored the majesty of my Father who sent it to me. I had fulfilled his commands. He fulfilled what he promised. It talks about mingling with nobles, being happily received, and that there is a further journey. So this could mean as we are returning and we have departed from Earth, returning back to source, there are stages to truly become united with our soul family. Maybe we still need a little bit of healing. Maybe it's just a transition that also still takes time. It's not something that's instantaneous. To really unite with your soul family, to be source, to feel comfortable with having a truly spiritual, non-material existence, just to be vibrating energy. So he promised me that I would journey soon with him to the gate of the King of Kings, and with my gifts and pearl, I would appear with him before our king. So I think that I looked on YouTube to see if there was any like videos on this, and there are a lot. I think that I am not the only one who read this and was struck by this, because I don't think I've made a video on anything else. But this was just, as soon as I read it, I just instantly thought, I want to share this. This is so, I don't think I completely understand it, but I understand enough how important it is. So yeah, so apparently I'm just like, that's what everyone feels. So there's so many videos on this. So I would, do a search and check them out, because a lot of them are more artistic and not just, someone sitting when the sun is departing and reading, giving commentary. So it's probably more interesting. So anyway, thank you. If you have any additional thoughts or have read this more times than I have, and or even if you haven't, but you have some ideas about some of the symbolism. And I do have the other video where I'm just reading the whole thing. So if you don't have the Gnostic Bible, or you don't have a copy, I'm sure you can find it on the internet for free. If you just Google it, and I'm sure someone has written it down or scanned the pages. But you can listen to that and have the whole version, and then come back here and comment. All right. Thank you, everyone. I will catch you next time. Let's see if I can. Okay, stop recording. Okay, bye.